communications despite a pandemic. So Haas Group's been well renowned in the professional credit industry, collections as a peer-reviewed HFMA awarded agency that's been in business since 1930. NSource is our early out offering, and we are so excited to be here today. So I'm going to introduce my team very quickly, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. So at the top of our screen, we've got Mr. Huntley McNabb. Huntley is our Chief Marketing Officer. He and his team put that amazing commercial together and the deck, and we are so blessed for him and his business acumen. One more wave, Huntley, with a big smile. Such a handsome guy. Lisa Kirk, my boss, she got me started in the presentation mode with Idaho HFMA. As a past president, she has to deal with me on the daily. So let's pray for her. And she's such an amazing boss to work with. She'll be taking a breakout session as well. My brother, Carl Christensen, is doing a pop-in Zoom appearance today. He'll be helping in the breakout sessions. Look at that handsome face. Where's our smile? Thank you. Jeffrey Johnson, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Incredible. Many of you have seen him on the stage, various and sundry HFMA. He and Marcy Molman put together Western Region the last time we were all together in Vegas. That feels like forever ago. So let's spotlight Jeffrey Johnson if we could, please. Sydney. There he is. And Marcy Molman, she's my road dog and my room host with this. Most of us remember her from Montana and also Western Region. And last but not least, Mr. Scott Purcell. So Scott is the president of Haas Group, and an absolute pleasure to work with as a servant leader. I have to tell you that I have so much respect for the work that Scott has done as an agency owner who's well-versed in aged collections. I've seen him swim upstream into the early outfield and blossom. So not only is he the president of our company, but he's the president of a sister agency called the American Collectors Association. And we are so honored for him to be presenting today. So with that, Scott, I'll turn it over to you, and we're ready to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Callie. I never tire of your enthusiasm. And welcome, everyone. I am going to do the magic I'm supposed to do in sharing my screen and making sure this happens properly. This is the most stressful part of the transition for those of you that present. And Callie, can I get a thumbs up? Are we looking good?
Everything looks really great. And as people have questions, drop them in the chat. Scott will call for questions as we move through.
Terrific. Thank you so much. It's so good to be with HFMA family. I'm Oregon-based, but have been a long-standing member of the Northern California chapter. And like you, I miss the get-togethers that we could do in person, but I'm grateful for the technology that we have that allows us to get together at times like this. So friction-free patient engagement, that implies there is some friction. So let's take a look at that today. We'll take a brief moment and look at our current environment and talk about what those sources of friction are for us. Then we'll talk about the objectives. What could we really accomplish as we put our heads together? And 5 key strategies that we believe you could apply immediately and begin to accomplish progress towards meeting those objectives. We'll do a brief summary, and then perhaps the best part, breaking into our workout groups, where we can hear provider to provider your insights on some of these key issues. So what is the current environment? You get tired of talking about it. I get tired of thinking about it, but definitely the coronavirus. And even though we're tired about it, the thing is, it's not going away anytime soon. And that's the unfortunate reality that we're in. So we've seen lines like this. Our normal routines are impacted. All of us are learning to navigate new processes to get COVID tests, hopefully to get the COVID vaccine, and even workarounds in how we obtain our normal routine healthcare services. Now, how about that Boulder provider this week? You might have saw that in Becker's. They denied a vaccine shot to a 70-year-old patient who had an unpaid medical bill, about $230 if I remember right. And then an apology call from the CEO. Was anyone poorly intended? No, but we're having to navigate all those kinds of things because the world is different. What about high unemployment? This is so different from the Great Recession because very specific industries are highly impacted. Restaurants, hotels, motels, cruise lines, airlines. It's very specific where this unemployment is occurring, but it is significant. Many in our communities are now unemployed or underemployed and having to navigate processes to get assistance. And this is a picture of a drive-through food distribution event. We haven't seen events like this, and we're not used to such wide-scale need. And I know our hearts go out to all of our neighbors that end up in this circumstance. Civil unrest. This is a big deal. There are still true equity issues and equity lens issues that we need to work on. And the unpredictability of civil unrest presents further new circumstances that we all have to navigate. And of course, this is a picture of ballots from the election, and the election took an emotional toll on the whole country as well. So what are those sources of friction? Well, one, we're all concerned as people about the health of our own employees. That's front and center. What about the vaccine distribution? There's a lot of hurdles, a lot of logistics to make that happen and happen well. What about our scheduled procedures? We know that's hurting our revenue, but more importantly, it's hurting the providers, all the doctors and nurses and all the support staff who were teed up to do them, and the patients who now have to work through the emotions of putting on a hold, perhaps yet again. So all of that change is difficult. And then lastly, we're seeing shortages. You know, we had unmet or unfilled positions in our healthcare organizations prior to COVID, and we still do now. And that doesn't marry with the high unemployment rate. But as I said earlier, that unemployment rate is very targeted in certain industries. So we still have staff shortages, and that's creating a fatigue from COVID-related things that we all have to deal with, but also fatigue from those shortages that we had even from the beginning of the pandemic. And then what about friction within the revenue cycle? One, we've got our new billing paradigm. There's ambiguity there. There's frequent changes there. What about our revenue shortfalls? A recent Kaufman Hall survey showed that 52% of revenue cycle leaders were moderately concerned about the financial viability of their own organization, and 22% were extremely concerned. That's about 1 out of 4. What about system or vendor inflexibility? For many of us, if our computer systems, if we can't turn on a dime, or if IT has a huge backlog, and we know we need to implement a change, and we can't, that becomes a great frustration, a great friction. What about our vendors? I know because of COVID, we rewrote pretty much every letter we had in our inventory, and we created a slug of new ones. So then I'm putting immense pressure on our letter vendor, as I suspect many of you were, to get those changes done quickly so we could change the message and engage our patients in the appropriate way based on the new circumstances. And when that inflexibility is there, it's so frustrating. Now, the world keeps evolving. What about communication preferences? This has nothing to do with COVID, though COVID did accelerate some of this. Everybody that we deal with wants to be communicated with in a different way. Some want text, some want email, some want a mobile app, some want a live phone call, some want a live chat. And if we are not keeping up with our systems, and if our vendors aren't keeping up with their systems, there will continue to be gaps in how people prefer to be communicated with. And that causes friction. Attitudes about healthcare costs. Now, I'm a bill collector, so I live this every day. And people have a copay and they have a deductible. And they say to me, well, aren't we in a single payer free healthcare system? I go, no, you've seen that article or that headline in the news. It's being debated, but that's not how we're living life today. And so there's a gap between what people are expecting and the rules we're all playing by today. And ACA, the Affordable Care Act, has so many great attributes to it. But one of the downsides is the higher out-of-pocket costs. And that's been a gap from the beginning. And we're still trying to find ways to better close that gap. So what are our objectives? You'll get to be with Jeffrey Johnson. He actually worked for Dr. Stephen Covey. And one of Covey's most famous sayings to me was, start with the end in mind. And as an accountant, I really like that because it allows me to work backwards. It says, what am I trying to accomplish? And now what is standing in the way between me and accomplishing that goal? Now, we all want one-touch resolution. There's an efficiency and a cost savings from it. But there's also a quality of the patient experience that's really important. And ultimately, We want that ease of use that we have in the Amazon experience in the revenue cycle. We want our patients to experience that. Wouldn't it be great if every discount that was based on the federal poverty level was right the very first time you recorded it and you never had to make a change? Wouldn't it be great if every interaction I had with a patient resulted in full resolution of their account and I never had to touch it again? Wouldn't it be great for you if you sent less accounts to bad debt? Now, that's not so good for me, but that would be a good thing, right? And I really do think it's worth the effort to identify what we really want and then work backwards and improve the chances of actually getting it. Now, so many of us in the revenue cycle, you with the provider, me as a vendor, we want that financial experience that the patient is having to be equal to or greater than the clinical experience. Why? Because the CEO seat is important as well. We all want long-term relationships with those patients. We want them to say good things about us to their neighbors in the community. We want them to come back next time they have a problem. This is perhaps a new piece of information to some people. I think it's significant, and I think it can help as we talk to our colleagues about the changes that we want to make. It's called the peak end rule, and it's a cognitive bias that impacts how people remember past events. Either very intense positive or negative items impact that memory, as well as the final moments of an experience. Now, Nobel Prize winning psychologist and economist Daniel Kahneman found that our mental capacity, and this came through evolution, we can't remember every instance of everything we've ever experienced. And so this bias is, let's just remember the peaks, either good or bad, and what happened at the very end of an experience. And so that's efficient. And the thing of it is, if we all have a goal of ensuring that the financial experience is equal to or better than the clinical experience, there's a lot of pressure on us. First, we're at a disadvantage because we're already asking people for money. And two, we're positioned at the end of the experience. So based on the peak end rule, we're already at a disadvantage. Now, starting with the end in mind, some of us use Net Promoter Score. Some of us use other tools to gauge what that experience is like with the patient. And in the Net Promoter Score world, one of my favorite questions is, how likely are you to recommend? And a detractor score would be anything from 1 to 6. A passive score would be 7 or 8. And a promoter score would be 9 or 10. And so the Net Promoter Score, for those of you not familiar with it, is simply the math between the promoters and the detractors. So let's take our first poll question. I want to find out, everyone in the audience here, does your organization measure patient satisfaction? And I've got to find my poll questions. Marcy, I am not seeing it on mine.
Does Sydney have our poll questions mocked up? I think that was.
Yep, I think National set them up for us. I'll be able to.
You just have to click on the polling option, everybody. Click on your bottom of your screen on the polling option and you'll see the polls.
There it is. We
There
found
we go.
it.
Thank you, thank you. So one, yes or no, does your organization measure patient satisfaction within the patient financial experience? And if the answer is no, the second question is, do you feel that they should? So let's take a brief amount of time and answer that and see what's going on with the rest of the providers in the audience.
I love to see those responses coming in. Looks like the winner is on the number 2 side, if not, Scott.
Well, Marcy, I've lost control. There we go. So it's completely in your hands. And look at that, a 50-50 tie, and 100% of those that don't have it wish they did. So thank you for your feedback. We've got a couple other poll questions, and we will keep going here, but that is great feedback. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about 5 strategies that you could implement now to actually help accomplish those objectives. So 1, now remember, I'm a CPA and an accountant, and I love the math part of this. So the first strategy is gathering complete and accurate data. Now, we have a behavioral scientist on staff, and we have a data analyst team. And so we looked at 1 million randomly selected accounts and got over a 95% confidence interval. For those of you that remember your statistics, that's a very good thing. And we asked the basic question, what is the value of a good phone number, a good address, and a valid date of birth? Now, these things seem so basic, right? But flawless execution of the basics, as Vince Lombardi would say, is the key to winning games. And so here's what we found. Recovery could go up 10 to 20%. That's a basis point. So it's really 100 to 200% over your baseline. So if you weren't getting good phone, address, and date of birth information, and you were getting 15% recovery, let's say, but now you introduce that good information on a consistent basis, you're going to get 25 or 35% recovery out of that population just by having that good data. Let that sink in. And I'll go into a couple more numerical examples for the other accountants in the room that enjoy it as much as I do. Now, of course, this helps the financial health of the provider, but it also protects patients from price increases. And I think that point often gets lost. In my work with ACA International and working with over 2,200 other collection agencies across America, that's one of the most poignant things. Collection agencies return over 90 billion a year back to the clients we serve, people just like you. And in turn, that saves every American family about $700 a year from rising prices. That's significant. Now let's talk about this point in the experience here. One might posit that it's an inconvenience to the patient as we continually ensure that that information is complete and accurate. But if you think about the peak end rule, that kind of a conversation really doesn't measure at all. That's not going to be a super high and it's not going to be a super low. But think about the emotionally charged bad experience if we don't have that information and now we can't get them a bill for months and months, or even worse, when they do get the bill, they're already in collections. That has not helped our net promoter score. So this is actually one thing that we can control or at least greatly influence. Outside, of course, getting the right payer details, that has a huge impact too. But we can actually do something about this very specific thing. Getting these 3 data elements right consistently has a huge impact on the financial health of your provider organization. It also helps with the quality of that guarantor experience. Some of you may remember Paul O'Neill. He was the CEO of Alcoa and later Treasury Secretary. He had one goal, which was worker safety. And Wall Street hated him at first, because they'd say, well, what about your next quarter earnings? And he'd say, didn't you hear my earlier answer? I'm focusing on one thing, worker safety. But the reality is, as he did that, so many other good things happened in the organization that a year later, he did have record profits and record revenue. So could focusing on the completeness and accuracy of these simple data elements be a key to record financial metrics for you? Now, it's funny, we're all patients as well, right? And I'm gauging this as part of my experience with my doctor, and my doctor's clinic group happens to be a client, so I'm especially tuned into that. And they've done a great job of incorporating these questions into the electronic technology, but I don't see the same consistency of the people that interact with me. Let's jump into a few more examples. Here is, we looked at the value of an email address, and we looked at the average marginal effect and found that 443 basis point improvement in recovery by having any email address. So let's look at the base case. Let's say we have 100,000 accounts without an email address. The average balance is 500, and we normally would recover about 20% of that. So our collections are going to be $10 million on that population. But now if we add in the email address, we're going to collect 24.43%. That's now an amount of $12,215,000 is our recovery, or a 22% improvement. That is a worthwhile goal. Now I'm going to do another polling question. Let's take a look. What percentage of email addresses are you capturing from your patient population today? And so the answers are easy: less than 25%, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, or over 75. Now I realize I haven't given you any time to log into your systems. This isn't meant to be stressful. Just ballpark it, and let's see how people are doing today in terms of collecting email addresses, because we know there's a significant financial impact to doing so. Thank you for putting that up, Marcy. There's your 4 answers. Choose one. Now, I'm 57 years old. You guys probably guessed that, right? But I remember going to the fair as a kid, and that was one of my favorite ones. When you pull the trigger on that one gun, it would make your horse race across, and that's always what reminds me of these Zoom poll questions. So let's go ahead and take a look at how those results are coming. All right, about 30% are under 25, about a similar amount, 25 to 50, and 40%, the majority, are 50 to 75%, which is fantastic. Thank you so much for that feedback. That is great feedback. So you can see there's some room for improvement. There is some additional money we can bring into our organizations. Okay, perhaps my favorite slide, because of the accountant in me. So scenario A is a scenario, not realistic, but 100% of the population does not have email. And that's our base $10 million. Then you can see scenario B. Let's say we started a program, we have some success, and we're 85% without and 15% with. So even that small improvement still gets us 332,000 of improvement just by having that email address. Now, scenario C, this one actually is in line with the polling answers we just saw. Let's say we had 35% without, but 65% with. If that was the scenario in our organization, we could actually improve by $1.4 million. That's significant just by changing how we are in the revenue cycle and in registration to collect an email address. Okay, the second strategy, now that we went through my most favorite math part, this part is quite exciting for me as well. Training our staff to collaborate. And there's 2 elements to that. One is using behavioral science. So let's take a look at what that behavioral science is to get better results. And number 2, using speech analytics to monitor, test, and train what it is we're implementing. Now, this is one of my favorite people in the whole world. His name is Dr. Richard Tailor. He actually won the Nobel Prize in 2017 for his work in economics. He's also a best-selling author. So here we show you the book Misbehaving, highly recommended. But another one I recommend is Nudge. He's an amazing person that has a lot of insights. So we took our behavioral scientists and we actually did some experiments. Yes, we had a control group and we had a test group. This is what Dr. Thaler found and that we've applied. Rational people want to be in control of their financial future. That's really important, a really important concept. And so an old talk-off might be, Mr. Guarantor, you owe $2,500. How much can you pay today? And the guarantor might say something like, what's the lowest payment you'll accept? And you get to the bottom real quick. With Dr. Thaler, and I'm giving you some free advice here, and you can see at the bottom of this slide how to download the white paper to get more details. But here's how the talk-off evolved. Mr. Guarantor, you own $2,500. If you pay $75 a month, it'll be this much in interest and take this long to pay off. If you paid $150 a month, it would have this much in interest and take this long to pay off. And all of a sudden, that patient is not viewing me as an adversary. They're viewing me as an ally. And they might say something like, well, Scott, what if I paid $112 a month? How long would that take and how much interest? And now it's a collaboration. Here's what we found. Collectors that use this talk-off increase the size of the payment by over 50% by putting the control back into the hands of the patient by using modern behavioral science. Now, that sounds all cool, right? But here's what happens. So our behavioral scientist, he's listening to phone calls, both in the test group that is doing the new talk-off and the control group that doesn't know anything about it. But mama didn't hire no dummies. In our lunchroom, this is pre-COVID, they eat lunch together. And the people in the test group heard the people in the control group, or vice versa, bragging about how easier these conversations were. And so the people in the control group caught on, copied it, and all of a sudden, he started hearing, I didn't teach Randy, I didn't teach Susie how to say that, but they're saying it and they're great success. So we had to call a timeout so we could do all the math to prove whether there was a benefit or not. But that's a funny little anecdote about what happened. So the key there is that we use speech analytics to monitor what was going on. So let's do one more poll question here, and then I've got another one at the end. Does your organization today, internally, in your provider organization, use a speech analytics platform to monitor your agents' conversations? Really for training, feedback, and finding ways to improve.
Everybody who's responding, Scott, knows that they have to participate and be here at the end to win that prize, right? We're giving away $200 to Amazon for our most active member.
That is so true, Callie, and what a fun prize to be able to email through the Ethernet. So you're not waiting for months for that prize.
Look at how many more responses we got there.
We just needed some incentive.
We all need a carrot, much better than the stick.
There is light at the end of the tunnel, isn't there? All right, let's take a look, Marcy, at what those results are. 31% do, 69 don't. So that's something to consider, is how would you get feedback about if you are deploying some new strategies based on modern behavioral science, do you know if it's working or not? So the tool we use helps us do several things. First of all, we record calls, and we record calls in stereo. So I can hear how the patient is speaking, and I can analyze how the agent is speaking. Now, not only do we find out the exact words being said, but also the emotional intelligence. And of course, this is very telling. I have a way of knowing, did the call start out good? In other words, the patient was in a good mood and ended cranky. That would be horrible. Ideally, they start out cranky and they end good. That means the agent did a great job. So that's very important. We use it to manage compliance, but more than that, we also use it to segment and look at the quality of the interactions based on certain characteristics of the patient. So if we have a confused consumer type or patient type, we train our agents to spend time educating them on the process and simplifying that process by providing examples of what other similar consumers have done in that circumstance. And that really helps to know and be able to break out those calls by type. One of my favorite ones is we saw that, and you get this in the provider organizations as well, the patient will say, well, my insurance should have paid that. And we found with this tool that those can be really long conversations, but they're just perfunctory, right? The patient needs to provide their insurance information. So what we did is we created a new landing page having that insight from the call recording system. This is a big volume of calls and it takes a lot of time. And it's not a great experience for the patient. So now our collectors, when they hit that circumstance, can say, oh, Mr. Patient, I understand. Let me send you a text link and that'll take you to a page. When you get home tonight, why don't you fill that out with all your insurance information? That'll get submitted back into our system. And then we use a bot to actually get that information into our system, and then an automated workflow to get that insurance data to our provider. So that's sort of a soup to nuts way of automating something and providing a greater experience for the patient. And we got that insight from the call recording system. Now, all of us, I think, care about these two things, empathy and politeness. And so in this tool, I'm able to measure from that emotional intelligence perspective, how much empathy and politeness is occurring by agent, trended over time, so I can see if anybody needs more help in that area. So this is a word cloud. I know on several boards I've been on, this is often your going away present. They will, all your other fellow board members will submit words and they'll create this word cloud and give it to you. Typically, yeah is not the main word in one of those gifts that I've seen. But this tool prepares a word cloud based upon the actual words the system heard an agent or a collector say during the month. And this happened to be one from professional credit. And the agent actually said, yeah, over 3,000 times. We could take our mouse and click on it and see how many times it was actually said in the month. And it turned out this person used it as filler, like some people would say, And when there was a coaching session with this person explaining this, they said, I don't do that. And we're like, well, the machine heard it, and here we can click on it and we can listen to some calls. And then that coaching session got interrupted. She had to take a call, and she started saying, yeah, 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 yeah. And then she said, oh my gosh, I'm saying yeah, and I'm not supposed to, which was not a great thing to say either, but at least she became more attuned to that particular negative habit, and she was able to improve her performance from that point forward. So a very practical, useful tool. Lastly, in training staff, I do want to promote this best practices for resolution of medical accounts guide. This recently came out. It was a joint project from HFMA and ACA International. A lot of work went into this. There was a version 1 many years ago of this. Now as times have changed, we have this next version. It is a tremendous resource. In fact, I'm going to mention something specific in just a minute. So the third strategy is tailoring communications. So here we want to talk about the context, which is really the circumstances that that patient's in, the content, what are the actual words that we're going to use to communicate with that person, the tone, when we do communicate it, how does it make them feel, the persona, this is a very important tool, and I'm looking forward to sharing a little more about it in a minute, and lastly, consistency. Of all the touch points that we have, either through the provider or with our vendors, are those experiences consistent and create the same feeling and have the same message? So an example of this, maybe context is they have COVID or a job loss or an illness. So what might our content be? Well, we could talk about flexible arrangements. We could talk about discounts. What's our tone? Empathy. The persona is the patient we're choosing to rally around with its specific characteristics, and consistency. Being purposeful of every touch point we have. Is the message the same? Is the tone the same? So I'm going to talk about Banner Health, and in this place, this is from publicly available information. So you can see the site that references the case study at the bottom of this slide. And to align their organization around their commitment to customer-centric care, Banner created a single persona to embody the Banner customer. The name they chose ended up being Sophia, who's a busy mom who values convenience and cost. And she brings to life the needs of the typical Banner customer. So they looked at all the other personas and said, if we could take care of Sophia, we would take care of all the other personas. So they put a lot of work and effort into it. And it really helps them think twice about any of the decisions. They first say, okay, how would Sophia respond to this? And it's a great tool to really try to measure the impact of the decisions we make. And what will the impact be to our patients? For Banner's Customer Experience Center, this meant implementing technology that makes Sophia's life easier by proactively offering wellness, wellness exams and communicating via text. Now, as they dug into Sophia, you can see something she might say, that she spends a few hours every month at her parents' house helping them organize their meds. But she's human as well. And what if she makes a mistake and she worries about that? She worries about her family's safety and comfort. That's what she's thinking. What is she feeling? She has to take on so much. She has to manage the purchasing, the delivering, the organization, and the tracking for everybody in the family. And what does she really want? She wants automated tasks so that she does not have to do and think of every detail for every family member that she is taking care of, including each of their unique schedules and needs. Now, of course, she's fictional, but it's based on a lot of actual interviews and conversations that they had with real Banner customers. And it really paid off. Now, professional credit, Carl, who you got to meet, Callie's brother, him and I have been thinking about that in our hiring procedures. And when we started thinking about our absolute best employees, we did end up with a persona. And it did cause us to think about maybe there's some policies that we need to modify in order to be more flexible if we're going to attract more people of that same persona. And so I really do think this is a very valid activity and worthwhile, worth the investment to make. The fourth strategy, you could have predicted this, using technology to engage. And this is one of my favorite slides. On the outer ring, have all the different touch points a patient could have with us. So they could log into our portal. They could talk to a live agent. They could interact via the IVR or live chat. They could interact with a text. They could interact with a really cool mobile app, or they could interact via email. And then in the inner circle, I'm using tools, the behavioral scientist and the speech analytics tool in each of those different touch points to evaluate consistency and effectiveness. And so I'll stay here for just a second, but I think it's worth a diagram like this in your own organization to say, what are those various touch points? And are we being consistent? And is the tone the same in each patient experience? Now, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. So we at Professional Credit and InSource were well on our way for the full omnichannel or digital engagement strategy. And then COVID hit. And you can see before COVID, we were at about 1 out of 4 interactions with the patients we serve were using the digital engagement tools. But with COVID, that doubled. And it was so good to have those tools in place. Because of COVID, people's mindsets changed. They wanted more of that self-service availability, and we were able to provide that to them. Now, one of the other things is we have to identify what are the common issues that a patient can discuss with a rep, and then ensure that our technology can actually handle it. So here's an example of the work we did to ensure a settlement option could be handled on a self-service basis. Once again, going after that consistency theme. This also aligns with consistency. I said earlier, we rewrote all of our letters during COVID, so you can see off to the right of this slide some of the changes we made to better talk about the digital engagement tools available to those patients. You know, as I said earlier, we're all patients. And from my own provider, I saw inconsistency in the reps asking for my contact and insurance information. But the technology is always consistent. And when I do talk to a rep, it's from their tonality that causes me to feel that I'm really cared for. But it's when I use the technology, I know they're capturing everything that needs to be captured. So it's really the marriage of what the technology does well, along with what the people do really well, that provides that great patient experience. Now, from that 1 million record study, we also found that patients who use electronic means of communication pay 30 days faster than those who don't. They also pay in full 42% of the time, and then 39% are less likely to default on a payment plan. So offering those digital tools really helps. The other item I talked about from that recent HFMA and ACA publication is they've got sample broad consent language that you can incorporate into your intake documents to make sure from a compliance standpoint that that patient is agreeing to use all of those different tools. And so let's do our last poll question. Let's find out, and you could choose any or all that apply. Does your current consent language allow for voice auto dialer or voicemail from an auto dialer or email or texting? And if you've done a good job of getting all of that authorization, are you also assigning it to your third parties? Let's take a look at that. I'm really curious to see how this one comes up. Now, in our organization, compliance and effectiveness are always done together. Compliance isn't a side thing, and I suspect many providers operate in the same way. If we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. And this language is what allows us to have the tools and really set the stage of what that relationship is going to be like with that patient. Let's give just a little bit more time.
Couple more seconds for people to get their votes in. We got another one. All right.
Thanks, Marcy. Let's take a look.
Got it.
Look at that. So a lot of the bullets are being covered already, which is fantastic. There are some gaps there though. So for those that don't have all those boxes marked, consider that. And that consent language is in that most recent best practices guide. And I do want to say on the evening of December 31st, the FCC also issued a new rule that affects you and that affects me. And that'll kick in, I believe, July 1st. And that is we actually have to have consent to leave a voicemail to a landline. Yes, you heard me right. We have to have consent to leave a voicemail to a landline. And there's a cap on how many calls could be made to a landline in that new FCC rule. So that would be one more item to incorporate into your consent language. Now for professional credit, and I'm not giving legal advice here, I will mention that we saw a few other things that we wanted to obtain. So on this slide, you can see in red what we did. If you want it, reach out to Callie and we can get that to you. But there's a case called the Reyes case that is consistent, that says this consent is actually a bargained for element of the contract and therefore can't be rescinded. It's what both parties agreed to. That's a good thing from a legal standpoint. But there's also a policy element to it. Before I talk about that, I do want to say the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, did issue a new rule. Under the new administration, we don't know if that rule will be pooled or not. As it stands today, it will go in effect in November. And in order to use email with a third party, like your collection agency, there will be this additional letter that would need to go out either from you or from your early out provider advising the patient that the debt collector is going to get their email address, and if they want to opt out, they can. And that's what I want to talk about. I really think that using text and email is super respectful because at all times, the patient is in full control. At any time that they're too annoyed, they can opt out and not get messages via that medium anymore. And I just said, on the previous slide, well, they legally may not be able to, but ultimately that is a policy decision. We happen to choose to honor patients' request to opt out, even if the contract says they can't. And the reality is patients want to use these tools, and when used properly, very, very few will actually opt out. I hope that makes sense. The fifth strategy, staying in touch. Now, this is a slide. Many of us remembered the Great Recession, that really ugly bottom blue line there in 2008. But just look at how the recovery, it took a long time really to get to a full recovery. And some of the lessons we learned from that Great Recession is it took time for people to recover financially, maybe 30 to 36 months after they had a significant hospital episode before they were back on their feet financially to be able to repay that bill. We also know this, methodical, excessive outreach is unproductive and it damages relationships. And ultimately, it damages your ability to recover that account. If you're calling somebody every week while they're unemployed, that becomes very annoying. How do we overcome it? For us, we use an internally developed robust monitoring tool. So we're monitoring with different data elements when that patient's financial life is getting healthy again. And at that point, we're re-engaging and getting that recovery. Now, I don't know how many of you have read the proposed rule that came out on May 29th from CMS. It's good reading. The really good reading from that proposed rule is between pages 644 and 651, in case you just want to cut to the chase. Again, not giving legal advice, but having similar collection treatments on Medicare and non-Medicare accounts is really what CMS was addressing here. And they said this is not a new rule, this is a refinement or a restatement of what their view was all along on this topic. And they say up until the point that you deem that Medicare account to be worthless, that's where those collection practices should be in line. But once that Medicare account is deemed worthless, you do have now the ability to work those non-Medicare accounts longer. You could even send them to a secondary collection agency and not harm your Medicare reimbursement. And so this is the takeaway. When we're in a bad economic cycle like we had during the Great Recession, it takes people longer to pay their bills. And that non-Medicare population, you can create more cash for your provider organization by taking a longer view. And CMS this year, when they wrote that proposed rule in May of this year, May 2020, provides us the guidance we need in order to bifurcate those two populations and get even better answers than we have had in the past. So in summary, what are we trying to accomplish? One, that one-touch resolution, both in terms of the efficiency, but also the experience that that patient is having. Why? We want a positive impact on a net promoter score if we're using that or something similar, or at least Just qualitatively, we know we want them to come back as a customer of ours. We know we want them to say great things to their neighbors in our community so that our provider has an outstanding reputation. And 5 strategies in the revenue cycle that can be applied today that are doable. That's why I really was looking forward to our discussion today. 1, gathering complete and accurate data. That is a hygiene factor. That is a foundational thing. And I wanted to give you the data that you had for your teams, because does it take an investment? Yeah. Do you have to be consistent? Yeah. But it's something that we can do. Training our staff to collaborate. That's using both current behavioral science as well as tools like speech analytics to know is the talk-offs that we change, the way we talk to people, is it consistent with that new way we want to be? Tailoring all of our communications so that there's consistency at every touch point, both in terms of the message and how people feel they're being taken care of. Using technology to engage, that can help accomplish those goals. And then staying in touch. Look at the timelines between your Medicare and your non-Medicare accounts, particularly while we're in an economic crisis, because there may be more money to collect there. So I am so excited. Oh my gosh, I'm a minute ahead, Callie. So through the power of magic, we're actually going to break into 3 groups. All the 3 groups are going to have the same topic, which will be.
Scott, though, wait, before we do that, we have questions. Our
All
attendees
right.
have questions related to your presentation. Could we clear those now, or would you prefer to do that later?
Callie, here's the thing. For some reason, my Zoom is not displaying those to me. Are you willing to state them out loud?
Oh, you know I'll be your Huckleberry. Also your Vanna. But I'm not saying you have to be Pat Sajak. I might be aging myself. People might not even know Wheel of Fortune anymore. We had a question regarding some of the strategies that we enacted, pandemic related. I know we kind of consider ourselves the gold standard, and some of our clients stopped listing, some still listed. What did we do specifically for pandemic friendly collections, and how did that make our letters different? That was
Certainly.
one question.
We wrote 3 different letters on our own and then incorporated another one from one of our very forward-thinking providers. And basically the message was this: we're in this together. We understand the stress and the strain this pandemic, and I'm paraphrasing, has brought on. We want together to find a solution. And that, it's not about how much money can we get from you today. It's about let's work on this together. And we are in this together. And then part of it is also this appreciation for the great work that the providers are doing. So those are a couple of messages that we were able to incorporate. And then another specific one we did is for those clients we serve that they give us the authority to make the payment arrangements, we made smaller floor thresholds on those. And we also let patients know in one of our letter series, look, you could take care of this obligation for the low payment amount of X. And we actually just spelled it right out for them, what could be accomplished, so that they knew it was manageable. And we got good traction on all 3 of those messages.
That's great feedback. Just to follow up, and then we do have a couple more questions. For clients that you've seen stop listing, Scott, have we seen them start to relist again? And also, pursuing legal remedy. What are your thoughts and advice on that?
Wow, we've got great questions here, and I'm glad you're asking them. In terms of people stopping and then starting, we've had good experience of organizations doing that for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's fire related or other natural disaster related. There, the timeline is shorter. But there's been other reasons people have stopped. Sometimes it's because of a computer conversion that went awry and they just couldn't list for 6, 7, 8 months, unfortunately. And so our collectors have good skills at being able to explain the lateness of a bill if they're seeing it, if they haven't seen it for a while, if you will, and the provider wasn't able to get those statements out. We have talk-offs that help explain what happened and know that they're still being taken care of. So that's what happens in terms of those. I think if somebody's still pondering the decision, should I delay listings? I would say no for this reason. 80 to 85% of the people are working. So those people can pay those bills. And then we've got a strong level of empathy and a lot of alternative ways to address those people that are unemployed. Those are truly the people that are struggling to pay those bills. And they know they're there. Once again, back to Dr. Tailor, people want to be in control of their financial future. So just knowing it exists now, I think, is more healthy than being surprised 6, 8, 10 months down the road. With respect to legal collections, that's interesting. All along, and we have a lot of faith-based providers that we serve, and all along they've had a view of legal, many of them, that when we use legal for a patient that can pay but does not want to pay, that's a moral benefit, because if we can collect the money from people who can pay, then we don't have to raise prices on the whole community. And that's an important moral paradigm to consider. Now, I notice, suing during the pandemic in our legal program is significantly down, and we've done that voluntarily, but also in concert with clients. But I don't think it should be that way forever. And I know Northwell Health was in the paper, and they were only using legal on people that were making, I think, $140,000 a year or more. And eventually their CEO said, this should not be viewed as though we're the bad guys, because these people have the means to pay, but they don't want to pay. I'm paraphrasing. And I think that needs to be thought through. And we enjoy those conversations, but we're able to serve clients in both the paradigms, both that use a legal program, of course, it's been tempered during COVID, and those that don't at all.
That's such an important strategy, because as our providers are losing revenue on the front with the loss of scheduled and series appointments, no one is at a point where they can leave any pennies on the table, as it were. We have another question in a completely different direction, Scott. So it's a good thing you had Wheaties for breakfast this morning. Billy Joe at Banner, who you obviously gave an amazing shout out to Banner and Sophia, wanted to know a little bit more about your persona for the great employee, and what you're actually looking for, and maybe a little bit more there.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. I think our best employee looks a lot like Sophia, actually, where they are very responsible people. They've got a family at home, kids that are still in school that they're trying to take care of during the pandemic, which is so difficult. My heart goes out to the parents. I think they've got it perhaps the worst during the pandemic, of the different roles that they have to play. And so within that, they're such responsible people, and they're great communicators. But because of that, similar to Sophia, they 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, probably is not going to work as an ideal situation for them. They'll find a way to make it work, but I think we can find ways to be flexible on the schedule to make it an even greater work environment. And now that marriage between what's important to them and what's important to us becomes even stronger. And so I think that flexibility has popped out to us as one of the keys in looking at that great employee persona.
That was great. And so many people are wearing so many different hats nowadays, Scott. You make a well-made point with parenting and having to pivot. So we had one last question on the chat. And if anybody else has any that you'd like to handle as a general group, drop those in the chat right now. But the last follow-up was regarding consent. I know that you spoke about that, Scott, and we're huge proponents of a robust consent, capturing those email addresses. What would you say the biggest call to action is for our providers that are on the phone or on the computer with us, that maybe not capturing that information, or maybe don't have their consent where we would like it to be?
First of all, I think the providers and I know us as an organization, we want to play by societal's rules. And so that consent is really important. I also think outside of a legal paradigm, it sets us up for a healthy relationship with somebody when those expectations are made clear at the beginning of a relationship. So I think it makes great business sense to invest the effort to make sure your intake contracts properly reflect how you want that relationship to go. It covers you both from a legal standpoint, but I think more importantly, it covers you from a relational standpoint. Back to that patient experience, no surprises. And then it opens the door for more effective communication. In terms of, I hope what I've shared today, and we're an open book, we love to share and talk more, even if you're not our client. And I think we've given you the material you need to justify the investments, either in coaching or maybe system changes, to make sure you're collecting all those relevant data elements, because it really is money on the table. And it really is not an inconvenience for that patient to hear, please confirm, or is this still your address, your phone number, and your email address? If anything, it's in being in service to them. And you get back that peak end rule. For me, that peak end rule plays a really key role in understanding why it's so important, because that really potentially bad experience, if we don't have that information, is significant and will destroy our net promoter score. Whereas yeah, it might be inconvenient, but it's a really small deal to continually confirm that information. That's so worthwhile to prevent that really bad thing from happening.
I am so proud of you. You knocked it out of the park. Good job. So everybody's still here and they are excited to hear about what the breakout strategy is, Scott. So we're going to make some magic happen in these micro breakout sessions. Can you help manage everybody's expectations, please?
Absolutely. So we are going to go into 3 groups, and it doesn't matter which group you're in because all the questions will be the same. And the groups are led by either Lisa, Jeff, or Huntley. And there'll be 7 questions. So the first one is, what is your challenge in gathering complete and accurate contact information, both from patients and guarantors? Interesting nuance there that RevCycle people will understand. Likewise, any challenges in gathering email addresses from both those populations. The third question will be, do you see a 2021 project to further apply best practices in your patient financial engagement? So getting back to that earlier part of net promoter score and how we look at the financial side of the relationship, any changes you see there. The fourth question is, if you are using speech analytics, and we know several are, at least about a third, what benefits are you seeing? And then for the other part of the population, if you're not using them, what are the obstacles in getting there? And then question 6, if you are using a survey, what survey tool do you use? And 7, has COVID changed the way you take patient payments? And so all of those questions will be available in your breakout sessions as well. I know I went through them really quick, but those are the topics that you'll see in that way. And I will stop sharing my screen. I know through the magic that Marcy has, you'll all magically go to your 3 rooms, and then